Establishing my small business in the heart of the neighborhood was not just a professional endeavor. It was a labor of love, fueled by my dreams and aspirations. The vision began years earlier, inspired by the quaint charm of my surroundings. I could picture it, a cozy storefront filled with unique offerings that would not only serve the community but also resonate with its character. As I embarked on this journey, countless hours of hard work shaped each aspect of my business. From late nights spent designing the layout to early mornings sourcing local products, I poured my heart into creating an inviting space that reflected the spirit of our town. My goal was clear: to build a thriving establishment that would become a cornerstone of our community. Initially, support flowed in abundance from neighbors who shared my vision. They embraced my ideas, encouraging me not just with words but through their willingness to shop locally and recommend my business to others. This camaraderie turned my aspirations into reality, allowing me to forge relationships that extended beyond transactions. Every sale felt like a personal victory, reinforcing the belief that I was not merely an entrepreneur but a vital part of this vibrant tapestry. However, as my business started to flourish, so too did the scrutiny from our homeowners association, HOA. It began subtly at first, comments about the design of my sign and murmurs regarding the building's color palette. I brushed these off as mere administrative formalities, thinking little of their implications. Yet, what began as gentle nudges quickly escalated into a barrage of violation notices that felt more like targeted harassment than genuine attempts at maintaining aesthetic standards. The weight of their demands soon became overwhelming. Each letter was accompanied by fines that seemed disproportionate to any actual infractions committed. The joy that my business brought faded under the constant pressure, replacing it with anxiety and uncertainty about its future. I found myself on high alert, consumed by fear of losing everything I had worked so hard to build. Despite the looming threats from the HOA, a part of me remained unwavering in the face of adversity. After all those years devoted to cultivating relationships and nurturing dreams within this community, I refused to allow anyone to dictate how I operated within it, unaware yet that I held more cards than they ever anticipated. The charm of my neighborhood was undeniable, a picturesque blend of vibrant storefronts and tree-lined streets where neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles. Each building had its own character, telling stories of the families and businesses that had come before. It was this inviting atmosphere that drew me in, envisioning my small business as a vital part of the community tapestry. Initially, the support I received was overwhelming. Residents flocked to my store not just for unique products, but to celebrate the idea of keeping local businesses alive. It felt as though every customer who walked through my door was a friend, each interaction reinforcing my belief that I was contributing to something greater than myself. Community events thrived around us, from farmers' markets to seasonal festivals, all fostering a spirit of togetherness that made our neighborhood exceptional. In those early days, I participated in everything, from organizing charity events to hosting local artists for exhibitions in my storefront. My business quickly became a gathering place, where people felt comfortable sharing their thoughts, dreams, and even concerns about the community. The connections I built with customers transcended mere transactions. They blossomed into relationships based on trust and mutual respect. The charm of our neighborhood was not just in its aesthetics, but also in its sense of belonging. Families would stroll by on weekends, children laughing and playing while their parents exchanged pleasantries with shop owners. This vibrant dynamic was palpable and infectious, creating an environment where collaboration flourished. Local artisans began to showcase their work alongside mine, and soon our little area became known as a hub for creativity and innovation. However, as my business began to thrive against this idyllic backdrop, I couldn't ignore the subtle shift in the winds. The very same community that had welcomed me with open arms now started to feel fragmented under the watchful eye of the homeowners association. Their sudden focus on regulations and aesthetic compliance cast a shadow over our cherished ambience. What once felt like a supportive network began to feel constricted by rules and restrictions that seemed out of place. Despite this looming tension, I held tightly to the belief that my business was integral to our neighborhood's identity. The support I had initially received reminded me why I had embarked on this journey in the first place. Not just to create a successful venture, but to nurture a sense of community and connection amidst changing tides. The Homeowners Association, HOA, played a pivotal role in our community, primarily tasked with maintaining property standards and ensuring that the neighborhood retained its charming aesthetic. Their presence was generally accepted, seen as a necessary measure to uphold the values of our quaint environment. Residents relied on the HOA to manage everything from landscaping guidelines to architectural consistency, believing that such oversight would protect the integrity of our beloved neighborhood. Initially, the HOA acted as a supportive ally, promoting initiatives that aligned with community interests, such as beautification projects and local events. However, in recent years, their mission seemed to shift from fostering collaboration to enforcing compliance through rigid regulations. What once felt like guidance soon morphed into an intrusive watchfulness. As my small business began to flourish, I witnessed firsthand this change in dynamic. Suddenly, I found myself under the HOA's microscope. It started with seemingly innocuous critiques regarding my storefront signage. The height was deemed inappropriate, and I was advised to tone down the color scheme to fit their vision of uniformity. These concerns initially struck me as minor administrative issues, but as each month passed, I received a deluge of violation notices. Each letter seemed more severe than the last, accompanied by fines that felt disproportionate to any perceived infractions. What had felt like a vibrant support network transformed into a battleground where I was consistently on edge, worried about every aspect of my business. It became clear that the HOA had decided to make an example of me, perhaps perceiving my success as a threat to their vision of conformity. This unsettling scrutiny ignited a wave of anxiety. I feared not just the loss of my business, but also the erosion of the community spirit that had initially nurtured it. As I navigated this uphill battle, the irony began to emerge. This organization, which had once fostered a sense of belonging and cooperation, became a source of distress and division within our neighborhood. My story began to resonate with other small business owners who felt similarly oppressed by these escalating demands. The once harmonious collaboration that defined our community was being challenged. I knew that I needed to stand firm for not only my business, but for the collective spirit we had all cherished. Little did I realize then how this confrontation would set the stage for a much larger struggle against the HOA's increasing overreach. As my small business grew, the HOA's scrutiny became increasingly invasive, targeting what they deemed minor infractions that felt absurd in the larger context of our vibrant community. The first indication that I was in their crosshairs came when they criticized the height of my business sign. It was a modest display meant to be welcoming, yet they claimed it exceeded their prescribed limit by a mere few inches. A letter arrived in my mailbox stating that the height was out of character for the neighborhood, and they demanded immediate compliance. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming wave of frustration, particularly because my sign had been designed with input from local patrons who loved its warm appearance. Next came complaints regarding the exterior color of my building. What I selected was a pleasant shade that echoed the colors of surrounding structures, aiming to enhance visual harmony rather than detract from it. To my dismay, the HOA insisted that it clashed with their palette guidelines. They proposed a list of acceptable colors, all muted shades that seemed lifeless compared to the vibrancy our community thrived on. Their demand for repainting came alongside a hefty fine, sending a stark message that my personal expression as a business owner was not only unwelcome but unwarranted. Then there were arbitrary regulations concerning landscape maintenance. Although I kept my shop's flower boxes blooming and tidy, I received notices claiming that my choice of flowers was inappropriate. According to them, colorful blooms were too bold and did not align with their vision of understated elegance. With every violation notice piled on, I felt as though I was being treated like an intruder in a space I had worked tirelessly to enhance. It wasn't just about compliance. These demands felt personal, aimed at chastising my entrepreneurial spirit. That's when I realized the timing of their attacks couldn't have been worse. But sometimes, timing changes everything, just like subscribing to this channel seems to mysteriously boost your luck against overzealous HOAs. Try it, it might just keep your garden gnomes safe too. But back to the story. What had begun as friendly feedback transformed into an overreaching effort to stifle individuality among local businesses. Each interaction with the HOA deepened my disbelief that they viewed me as someone jeopardizing their aesthetic rather than as a fellow community member striving to contribute positively. In navigating this labyrinth of increasingly absurd regulations, I could see not just how focused the HOA was on enforcing compliance, but also how detached they had become from the community's essence. Their actions threatened to drain the very life out of our neighborhood, a place filled with creativity and vibrancy, and this realization fueled my determination to fight back against their excessive control. The mounting pressure from the HOA's relentless violation notices began to take a toll on both my business operations and my personal well-being. Each letter I received felt like a weight added to my shoulders, chipping away at the enthusiasm that had initially driven me to create this thriving establishment. At first, I tried to view their complaints as constructive feedback, hoping that perhaps there was room for compromise. However, as the frequency and severity of their demands escalated, it became clear that they were not interested in collaboration, but rather in enforcing compliance at any cost. With each infraction cited, it became more challenging to focus on the daily operations of my business. I found myself preoccupied with the threat of fines looming over my head, diverting my attention from customer service and product development to legal jargon and compliance requirements. On several occasions, I had to pause important meetings or cut short conversations with loyal customers simply to respond to yet another violation notice. This shift in priorities created a frustrating cycle where instead of fostering creativity and growth, I was consumed by anxiety and fear of losing everything I had worked for. As time went on, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. What began as minor annoyances transformed into sources of constant stress. Sleepless nights became the norm as I lay awake contemplating how to navigate the ever-changing demands of the HOA. The joy of entrepreneurship faded into a feeling of dread. I felt like a shadow of the confident business owner I once was. My health began to decline, marked by headaches and exhaustion that seemed to compound with every new letter in the mail. Moreover, the situation weighed heavily on my relationships within the community. Friends and fellow business owners would ask how things were going, but I struggled to articulate my frustrations without sounding bitter or defeated. The camaraderie that once fueled my business now felt strained under a blanket of tension made palpable by the HOA's actions. My longing for support turned into isolation as I battled these challenges largely alone. Friends began to notice the change in me, my excitement replaced by anxiety, and offered their encouragement, yet it felt like an uphill battle against a faceless entity that showed no signs of relent. Instead of being able to draw strength from my community, I felt increasingly alienated by their silence on these matters. It was becoming painfully clear that if I wanted to reclaim not just my business, but also my peace of mind, standing up against this unwarranted scrutiny would be necessary for both my livelihood and my sanity. Dealing with the relentless tactics of the HOA took a significant emotional toll on me, leaving me wrestling with feelings of frustration, defeat, and vulnerability. Each violation notice I received felt like a personal attack, a reminder that despite my hard work and dedication, I was being painted as the enemy in my own community. The initial excitement I felt while building my dream began to drown under the weight of constant scrutiny and aggressive demands. On particularly challenging days, I would sit in my office, surrounded by products that once inspired joy, feeling a deep sense of inadequacy. It was as if the vibrant energy that fueled my passion had been sucked away by the bureaucratic machine of the HOA. Their rigid approach not only stifled creativity, but also created an environment where fear overshadowed enthusiasm. I found myself second-guessing every decision, from marketing strategies to even my interactions with customers, worried that any misstep would invite further retaliation from the HOA. Frustration often morphed into feelings of defeat, especially when their excessive fines threatened to undermine my financial stability. The prospect of needing to scrape together funds to pay unnecessary fines left me hyper-focused on numbers rather than the vision that had initially ignited my entrepreneurial journey. The thought of downgrading my dreams or closing my doors permanently crossed my mind too many times. Each day felt like navigating a minefield, where one misstep could lead to catastrophe. Furthermore, vulnerability seeped into my personal life as well. Friends and family noticed how increasingly withdrawn I became. Conversations shifted from hopeful discussions about future plans to anxious rants about HOA violations and mounting pressures. Despite their encouragement and support, I felt isolated in my struggle. It was as if no one truly understood how deeply these challenges affected me, not just as a business owner, but as a person with dreams anchored within this community. A persistent cloud of anxiety loomed over me, manifesting in panic attacks and sleepless nights spent worrying about what tomorrow would bring. I longed for clear skies and peace of mind, the very things that had motivated me to pour so much love and effort into my business in the first place. As much as I wanted to fight back against what felt like an oppressive regime, there were moments when despair threatened to overshadow determination. Still, beneath all this turmoil lay an undeniable resolve. Despite the emotional upheaval, part of me clung fiercely to the hope that I could rise above these obstacles. My dream was not just about myself. It was deeply intertwined with visions for the community we had built together, a space filled with creativity that deserved protection against those who sought to suffocate it through conformity. As the pressure from the HOA intensified, I found myself at a crossroads, forced to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life, whether to continue fighting for my business or to close its doors for good. The relentless stream of violation notices and fines had become a constant source of anxiety, consuming both my time and mental energy. Each day felt like an uphill battle against an adversary that seemed more focused on compliance than community. I began weighing my options carefully. On one hand, I had invested years of hard work, pouring my heart and soul into creating a thriving establishment that resonated with the community. The thought of walking away felt like abandoning not just my business, but also the relationships I had built with loyal customers and fellow entrepreneurs. I recalled the laughter in my store, the excitement during local events, and the sense of belonging that had driven me to open my doors in the first place. However, I couldn't ignore the troubling reality of my financial situation. The fines were mounting, and what began as a manageable cost had escalated into a strain that threatened to push me toward financial ruin. It was clear that continuing down this path could lead to irreversible damage, both to my business and to my personal finances. I reflected on late nights spent anxiously calculating expenses versus income, where every additional fine felt like a nail in the coffin. With each confrontation with the HOA, it became clear they were not just targeting my business. They were seeking to crush my spirit. I worried about how much longer I could hold on before their tactics wore me down completely. The fierce entrepreneur I once was seemed to fade under the weight of this pressure, replaced by self-doubt and fear about the future. Conversations with friends and family only added to my internal conflict. They encouraged me to keep fighting, but what they saw as resilience, I began to see as stubbornness in light of an increasingly untenable situation. My heart wrestled with uncertainty. Would closing down really be giving up, or would it be a strategic move to preserve what remained? Ultimately, as I mulled over these complex feelings, I realized that closing down might be a means to reclaim agency over my life and dreams rather than succumbing to defeat. It allowed the possibility of starting anew, perhaps detached from the turmoil that had become synonymous with my current venture. This difficult decision was not taken lightly. It was born from necessity amid relentless pressure. In contemplating this shift, I also recognized that perhaps there would be opportunities ahead to rise again, this time fortified by lessons learned from adversity rather than crushed by it. In the midst of grappling with the HOA's pressures, a revelation struck me like a bolt of lightning. I owned a significant portion of the commercial properties in town, including the very building from which they were trying to force me out. This realization shifted my perspective entirely. All this time, I had been fighting not just for my business, but also for something far more substantial, my investment in the community itself. As I sat in my office, surrounded by familiar products and memories of laughter and camaraderie, the weight of this knowledge began to lift my spirits. The implications were profound. The HOA had been projecting their power over me, but in reality, I held a position that could tilt the scales back in my favor. It turned out that many of the properties they oversaw were part of my portfolio. I recalled attending meetings where I often felt marginalized, as if my voice was drowned out amid their discussions about compliance and aesthetics. Now I understood that I had leverage. It was time to use it strategically. With renewed determination, I began to formulate a plan. Instead of continuing to play defense against the HOA's tactics, I could shift the narrative and confront them head-on. My knowledge of local property laws and zoning regulations would serve as valuable tools in this fight. If they sought to bully me into submission through intimidation tactics and fines, then they needed to understand that their actions could have consequences far beyond my individual case. I reached out to fellow business owners who had faced similar challenges from the HOA and discovered a shared frustration. We began discussing potential strategies for resisting oppressive regulations, pooling our resources and insights to challenge the existing power dynamics within our community. It became evident that we were not alone. Many residents had grown weary of the HOA's overreach. As we prepared our collective response, there was a palpable shift in energy among my peers. No longer did we feel like isolated victims, but rather united advocates for positive change. This collaboration sparked hope, a sense that together we could reclaim our community from an organization that had strayed too far from its original purpose. In those moments of solidarity, I realized that my journey was no longer just about saving my business. It was about fostering resilience in our neighborhood as a whole. With each step forward, I felt empowered not just as a business owner, but as a vital member of a community determined to protect its identity against unwarranted conformity. The tables had turned. Now it was time for the HOA to reckon with those they had underestimated all along. With the newfound knowledge of my property holdings, I began to strategize a plan to challenge the legitimacy of the HOA's aggressive practices. My perspective had shifted from that of a beleaguered business owner to a prepared challenger, ready to leverage my significant stake in the community against their oppressive tactics. I realized that my properties were not just assets. They were tools that I could use to advocate for positive change within our neighborhood. First, I conducted extensive research into local property laws and regulations governing HOAs. It was essential to understand their rights and limitations fully, as well as the legal framework surrounding our community's governance. Armed with this knowledge, I could pinpoint specific regulations that the HOA might be misinterpreting or overreaching in their application. This was not simply about defending myself. It was about holding them accountable for their actions. Next, I reached out to legal experts specializing in property disputes and HOA regulations. Their insights helped refine my strategy. We discussed potential legal avenues for challenging the HOA's authority, including filing complaints against them for harassment and overreach. This collaborative effort laid the groundwork for a multi-pronged approach. I would not only defend my position, but also seek to expose the HOA's practices to others who had felt similarly oppressed. Connecting with fellow business owners and residents energized my resolve. We organized meetings where we could share experiences and discuss our collective grievances against the HOA. It was clear that many shared similar frustrations. We brainstormed ideas on how to unify our voices and create a stronger front. This camaraderie rekindled my belief in the community spirit that had initially inspired me to start my business. We decided to document our experiences meticulously, gathering evidence of the HOA's overreaching behavior, everything from violation notices to instances where their enforcement appeared arbitrary or excessively punitive. Our goal was not only to defend myself, but also to build a case that could resonate with other residents who felt marginalized by the HOA's aggressive oversight. As we prepared our challenge, I drafted a letter addressed to the HOA's board, outlining our points of contention and formally requesting a meeting to discuss our concerns. This was an opportunity to confront them directly, a chance for us to articulate our grievances collectively rather than as isolated individuals. The letter became a rallying point for our group, symbolizing our commitment to reclaiming our community. With each step forward, I felt a renewed sense of empowerment. The tables had truly turned. Instead of cowering under pressure, I was leading a charge toward accountability and positive change. Our fight was no longer just about saving one business. It was about protecting the essence of our neighborhood and ensuring that everyone's voice mattered in shaping its future. With the groundwork laid and a united front established, it was time to take decisive action against the HOA. We coordinated efforts to launch a legal challenge, which felt like a monumental step forward, a declaration that we would not be silenced or intimidated any longer. The initial adrenaline rush of this decision filled me with renewed determination, knowing that we were finally standing up for our rights as community members. Together with my legal team, we crafted a thorough case that highlighted the HOA's history of aggressive enforcement and overreach. We gathered evidence from our documentation, pinpointing specific instances where their practices exceeded the limits set by property law. This included not only the violations aimed at my business, but also complaints from other residents who had suffered under their heavy-handed approach. The weight of their shared experiences became a powerful motivator, fueling our commitment to bring about real change. I organized community meetings to keep residents informed and engaged in the process. Many were eager to lend their support, attending gatherings to discuss the steps we were taking. The atmosphere was electric with enthusiasm. Neighbors who once felt marginalized now found a sense of empowerment in standing together. We began to prepare our testimonies and gather letters of support from residents expressing how the HOA's actions had negatively impacted their lives and businesses. As word spread about our legal action, more individuals stepped forward to join our cause. They shared stories of battles fought against unreasonable fines and invasive scrutiny, forming a collective narrative that demanded attention. The local media took an interest, recognizing the potential implications of our fight and amplifying our voices. Articles began to circulate about ordinary citizens challenging an established authority, a narrative that resonated with many who felt overlooked and oppressed. When the day came to file the complaint formally, I felt a mix of exhilaration and nerves. Standing in front of the courthouse, surrounded by fellow advocates carrying signs of support, I recognized we were not just fighting for my business or against an impersonal organization. We were advocating for every resident's right to thrive within their own community. It was about reclaiming the spirit of collaboration and belonging that had initially attracted us all to this neighborhood. Our complaint cited clear examples of harassment and arbitrary enforcement, demanding not only accountability, but also a reevaluation of the HOA's policies. As we presented our case, I felt an overwhelming sense of solidarity with those around me, an army of determined individuals ready to reclaim our rights. It became evident that this was not merely a legal challenge. It represented a significant shift in how residents viewed their power within the community. I realized that through this journey, I had grown into a leader for change, fueled by the support of others ready to stand up for what was right. Armed with conviction and backing from fellow residents, we aimed not just to win a battle against the HOA, but to inspire ongoing efforts toward governance that respected the voices of all community members. Together, we were reshaping our neighborhood's future one step at a time. As our legal battle against the HOA progressed, I began to witness a significant shift in the narrative. No longer was I the beleaguered business owner under siege. Instead, I was emerging as a formidable challenger, and the HOA's overreach was becoming increasingly apparent. Each instance of their mismanagement and aggressive enforcement fueled our case, revealing just how far they had strayed from their original purpose. One striking example was when they issued a violation notice claiming that my storefront signage violated their height regulations, despite similar signs in the neighborhood being untouched. This blatant inconsistency illustrated their selective enforcement and vindictive approach, as they seemed to target my business specifically while allowing others to operate without scrutiny. We documented these discrepancies meticulously, showcasing how their actions contradicted their stated mission of maintaining community standards. Another instance involved their attempts to impose fines for landscaping choices that had been approved in past years. They claimed my flower boxes were too vibrant, labeling them as an eyesore while ignoring similar aesthetic choices made by other businesses nearby. This hypocrisy became a focal point in our legal challenge, bringing light to how the HOA was using subjective opinions rather than clear regulations to justify their actions. With each example we gathered, the narrative shifted further away from me being a mere victim and more toward exposing the HOA's systemic issues. My legal team and I framed our case around the idea that their practices not only harmed individual business owners, but also undermined community cohesion and trust. We argued that such inconsistencies created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty among residents, stifling creativity and individuality, the very qualities that made our neighborhood unique. Public support continued to swell as residents became increasingly aware of the HOA's overreach. Neighbors who once felt intimidated began sharing their own stories of grievances, feeling empowered by our collective fight for justice. They rallied behind us at community meetings, eager to contribute letters of support or testify about their own experiences with arbitrary fines and unwarranted scrutiny. As we prepared for court, I felt a surge of confidence knowing that we were challenging not just the HOA's authority, but also advocating for a community spirit that had been threatened for too long. The tide had turned. We were no longer fighting merely for my business, but for every resident who had been silenced under the weight of oppressive regulations. This legal battle illuminated the stark contrast between our vision for a vibrant community and the HOA's rigid control. Armed with evidence of their overreach and bolstered by public support, we were ready to present our case, determined to hold them accountable for their actions while reclaiming our neighborhood's spirit. The courtroom would serve as our platform for change, a stage where we could finally turn the tables on those who had underestimated our resolve. As our legal challenge against the HOA unfolded, the consequences of their aggressive tactics began to manifest, creating a ripple effect that they had not anticipated. The negative media coverage surrounding our fight shone a spotlight on the HOA's oppressive practices, and suddenly their reputation was at stake. Articles detailing our experiences with their selective enforcement and arbitrary fines resonated with residents across the community, many of whom had felt similarly marginalized but lacked the courage to speak out. Public sentiment shifted dramatically as stories poured in from other residents who had suffered under the HOA's heavy hand. Local news outlets picked up the narrative, highlighting how an organization designed to protect and enhance community standards had strayed far from its mission. This growing awareness ignited discussions within neighborhood forums and social media groups, where residents voiced their frustrations and shared instances of unfair treatment. The tide of public opinion turned against the HOA, leading to increased scrutiny of their actions. In response to the mounting backlash, HOA board members were forced to confront the reality that their authority was being questioned. They struggled to maintain control over their narrative as residents rallied behind our cause, attending meetings in droves and expressing solidarity for our fight. The once unassailable image of the HOA as a guardian of community standards began to fracture under the weight of public discontent. One particularly impactful moment came during a community meeting where I was invited to speak about our legal battle. As I recounted my experiences with the HOA's harassment, the room filled with nods of recognition and murmurs of agreement. Others stood up to share their own stories, tales of unjust fines for trivial matters and obstructive regulations that had stifled their businesses or personal lives. This gathering became a pivotal point. It transformed a previously passive audience into an engaged collective ready to demand accountability. The HOA's leadership found themselves in damage control mode as they attempted to mitigate the fallout from this growing public dissent. They issued statements claiming they were listening to community concerns and would work towards improvement. However, these assurances rang hollow in light of their previous actions. Their attempts to placate residents only fueled further skepticism about their commitment to genuine change. As more residents joined our legal challenge, the stakes rose higher for the HOA. Our unified front sent a clear message. We would no longer stand idly by while they wielded power without accountability. Each passing day revealed new cracks in their facade, exposing not just individual grievances but systemic failures that needed addressing. With each instance of pushback we documented, and every resident willing to share their story, it became evident that this struggle was about more than just my business. It was about reclaiming our community from an organization that had forgotten its purpose. The unfolding consequences faced by the HOA were not merely setbacks. They signaled a broader movement toward transparency, equity, and respect for all voices within our neighborhood. We were determined to see this through, not just for ourselves, but for every resident who deserved a fair chance to thrive in our beloved community. As our legal battle drew to a close, I reflected on the journey we had undertaken, not just as a fight for my business, but as a collective effort to reclaim the spirit of our community. The tide had turned dramatically. What began as an isolated struggle against the oppressive tactics of the HOA evolved into a powerful movement advocating for fair practices and respect for individual rights. This outcome symbolized not simply a personal triumph over adversity, but also the awakening of a resilient community spirit. The support we garnered from residents transformed our narrative. Neighbors who once felt silenced found their voices through our shared efforts, bringing forth a chorus of experiences that resonated powerfully with others. With the media shining a light on our fight, many were inspired to join us or voice their dissent toward the HOA's authoritarian practices. What had initially been dismissed as petty grievances blossomed into a larger critique of an organization that had lost sight of its purpose. In presenting our case, we highlighted how the HOA's actions not only targeted me, but also jeopardized the well-being of countless residents seeking to live harmoniously in our vibrant community. It became clear that their arbitrary regulations and selective enforcement harmed not just businesses like mine, but undermined the very fabric of trust within our neighborhood. We demanded a reevaluation of their policies and sought to establish more equitable practices that prioritized collaboration over compliance. As the court weighed our arguments, I sensed a renewed commitment among neighbors to advocate for systems that valued fairness, transparency, and inclusivity. The prolonged struggle had invigorated a spirit of solidarity, transforming frustration into determination. The backlash we witnessed compelled HOA members to reconsider their approach, an outcome I could hardly have imagined at the outset of this ordeal. Looking back, I realized this was more than just about winning a legal battle. It was about fostering resilience within our community and empowering each resident to advocate for themselves against unjust regulations. We had become champions not simply for our personal grievances, but for principles that ensured everyone's voice mattered in shaping our neighborhood's future. As we moved forward from this pivotal moment, lessons learned during this journey remained etched in my heart. We were no longer mere victims. We were advocates committed to nurturing an environment where creativity flourished unimpeded by unjust oversight. Together, we ushered in a renewed sense of community and accountability, setting new standards for how we governed ourselves while actively ensuring opportunities for everyone to thrive. This concluding chapter did not signify an end, but rather marked the beginning of ongoing efforts to cultivate a space where collaboration triumphed over authoritarianism, a community where each person felt free to express their individuality without fear of unreasonable scrutiny or retribution. As champions of change, we emerged together, strengthened by the trials faced along the way, and ready to embrace an empowered future shaped by unity and mutual respect. Reflecting on the journey we endured, I recognized how profoundly this experience had shaped not only me, but our entire community. What began as a personal struggle against the HOA's oppressive tactics transformed into a powerful testament to resilience and the importance of standing up for one's rights. Throughout this battle, I learned that adversity could serve as a catalyst for change, igniting a collective spirit that had long been dormant. The support we received from fellow residents was nothing short of inspiring. Neighbors who had once felt voiceless discovered their strength through shared experiences, uniting to advocate for fairness and transparency. This newfound camaraderie underscored the idea that our community was only as strong as our willingness to support one another. We rallied together, not just to fight against the HOA, but also to foster an environment where every resident felt empowered to speak out against injustices. One of the most significant lessons learned was that standing up for oneself often inspires others to do the same. Every time someone shared their story or voiced their dissent, it reinforced the notion that we were all in this together. This collective effort brought us closer, helping to rebuild trust among neighbors and restore a sense of belonging within our community. I witnessed firsthand how an engaged and supportive populace could shift the dynamics of power and challenge established authorities. Additionally, I discovered the importance of perseverance. The road was fraught with challenges, moments of self-doubt, and setbacks that threatened to derail our progress. Yet each obstacle presented an opportunity to adapt and grow stronger. Whether it was refining our legal strategy or building a more inclusive coalition, we learned to turn adversity into motivation, transforming frustration into determination that propelled us forward. This fight also illuminated the need for ongoing vigilance regarding community governance. The journey taught us that institutions meant to serve the public must be held accountable to those they represent. With transparency and inclusivity at the forefront, we aim to ensure that future decisions would reflect the collective voice of our residents rather than the whims of a select few. As we moved forward, our passion for advocacy did not wane. Instead, it blossomed into a commitment to uphold the values that define our neighborhood. We emerged not merely as survivors of an unjust struggle, but as champions of change, ready to nurture an environment where creativity flourished and individuality was celebrated. Ultimately, this experience forged a renewed community spirit that prioritized fairness and collaboration over authoritarianism. We learned that by standing together, we could not only reclaim our rights, but also create a vibrant neighborhood where every resident could thrive without fear of retribution. Our fight against the HOA became a rallying cry for justice and empowerment, reminding us all that we had the power to shape our future. A future built on solidarity, respect, and unwavering